Welcome to the latest installment of Dave's FAVE500. This is the long trek through 500 albums that I think anybody who's interested in music could, maybe should, make time to listen to. Now, 500, you say, this is like the fourth installment, so it's a long way to go. But you might say 500, but I've been collecting and listening to records for over 50 years now. So I've heard some, don't get me wrong, I've heard some turkeys in my time, but there are so many brilliant albums that have crossed my path. And as I've said in the previous videos, that I'm going to be bouncing around all the genres in this. In the last video, I had a jazz album. There'll be more jazz. In this one, there'll be a classical album. There'll be more classical. But there's also classic rock, hard rock, avant-garde, indie pop from the 80s. So there's a whole mixture of just absolutely fantastic albums that I really think that are worthy of anyone's time. So, I'm sure I was going to do more of a preamble than this, but I've forgotten what I was going to say. Anyway, let me just get on and just pick the 5 albums. They'll come. Anything else will just come to me as we go. Doesn't matter. Right. First album is by an artist that is a new wave artist who emerged in the 1970s and bounced all around the genres as he became a solo artist or band band leader throughout his career. He's kind of an artist that I wouldn't say splits opinion, but I would definitely say the law of diminishing returns goes hand in hand with this artist. I've never really loved him, even though I've got almost all of his albums and I've seen him several times. I kind of think he's a bit too clever for his own good. He's a bit too wordy. His voice is very unique, but not very warm. He's not very, seemingly not very emotional. But you can't deny that he's written and performed some really, really interesting songs and has put together some great albums. And one album I'm definitely wholeheartedly going to recommend is King of America by Elvis Costello. Or is it Elvis Costello on this? Is this Napoleon Bonaparte or Declan McManus? Because he changed his kind of name as he went through. Now, started off as new wave artist with This Year's Model, or My Aim Is Truer than This Year's Model. And he dallied with kind of a soul vibe on the Get Happy album. Before he leapt into country music with Almost Blue. And I think that kind of pissed a lot of people off, but he really sang rather well on that and picked up some great classic country songs. And I think, I still listen to that album today. But then he came back with Imperial Bedroom and Punch the Clock, and the critics kind of came back on board with him a little bit because I think they were just so pleased that he kind of ventured into country but then came rolling back. But this album came after Punch the Clock. Was there another one? I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. But this one, he was produced by T-Bone Burnett. I think he was hanging out with T-Bone Burnett around this particular time and loved his music. That not really classic country music, but that country music Americana vibe. And they agreed that they were going to do an album together, and this was it. And T-Bone ended up, as I understand it, is pulling together a team of Nashville royalty, or maybe Memphis royalty as well. But there's some fantastic musicians on this album, most of which are not really people I really know about, other than just recognizing that other people laud them. What have we got in particular? Just a couple of examples. Mitchell Froome. What have we got? David Hidalgo, Jim Keltner. Who else? See, there's a few of the musicians on here. James Burton. you've also got the attractions: Bruce Thomas, Pete Thomas, and Steve Naive. Yeah. So anyway, album. Why do I like this album? Well, it's absolutely jam-packed with beautiful melodic songs. It's the warmest album in his collection for me. Whereas he sings with some real restraint. I think the anger, the sort of new wavy anger that he had on the earlier albums, or many of the earlier albums, is kind of been parked for this album, and it's all the better for it. But it's got some absolutely beautiful songs, a really interesting cover version of Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood as well, which I understand he recorded when his voice wasn't in great shape, but it came out pretty well. I'll Wear It Proudly, American Without Tears, Eisenhower Blues. The one that I keep going back to is the closer, Sleep of the Just, which I think is kind of the warmest, most emotional song that Elvis Costello ever produced. And I'm sure there'll be some pretty good contenders in the race for being the best, but that's the one that kind of moves me the most. He sings so beautifully, and it's recorded absolutely wonderfully. So if you like Elvis Costello, you probably got this album already. But if I was ever to get around to do a rundown of Elvis Costello albums, then Whisper It Quietly, this will be number one, I think. Changing genre back into classic hard rock. This will be number 16 in my FAVE500. Number 17 will be Deep Purple and Come Taste the Band. Now, this is the only studio album they recorded with Tommy Bolin, because Ritchie Blackmore, I think, had kind of got sick of the direction the band was going in once Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale joined the band. Glenn Hughes with a very soulful voice and funky bass guitar. David Coverdale, much more of a bluesy singer, I think, than Ian Gillan. And I think that Gillan-Blackmore kind of partnership that drove Deep Purple up until till those two guys joined the band, Hughes and Coverdale. They kind of started to change direction. I think that was enough for Ritchie. Hung around for 2 albums and then he bailed. And then this album came along, and this, much maligned, because as far as I can remember, there are no classic rock guitar solos on this album. It's all funk. Tommy Bolin's guitar, I'm not a huge kind of collector of Tommy Bolin music. I'm not that familiar with everything, but he plays that funky, choppy guitar throughout this, and bending notes rather than shredding, and doing great elongated guitar solos. And I think because Bolin's in the band, Glenn Hughes' bass and Ian Pace's drums, the rhythm section here, are absolutely on fire. This is a really, really funky album. Coverdale sings magnificently. There's great tracks. I mean, the ones that I really like, the opener, Coming Home, Getting Tighter, is as funky as you're going to get. Love Child, This Time Around, an Ode to G, and You Keep On Moving has got a brilliant bass note that ends the track and ends the album. This is the 2 album reissue here. So there's other the remix version of the album on the second disc. But I think that's an absolutely fantastic album. If you forget about Deep Purple and the legacy of Gillan and Blackmore and just see this as a great hard rockin', funky rock band, this is hard to beat. I'm going to briefly venture into classical. I went to a concert last week. Jill and I went off to the Symphony Hall in Birmingham for what they called a rush hour concert, where the tickets were £10. We had seats 6 rows from the front, right in the centre, and that it was kind of almost like a rehearsal for the performance that was going to take place the following night, where our tickets in the same seats would have been £65 each. So we got a fantastic bargain. However, this piece of music is a music that I highlighted in a video that I did some time ago, 2 or 3 years ago now, which was entitled Classical Music for rock fans. I was trying, so anybody who's curious about classical music, and I acknowledge that it's mainly, but not always, but mainly for the older crowd. If you were brought up in the 80s and 90s on indie rock and Britpop and all that sort of stuff, that 3-minute immediate rush you get with that indie music doesn't lend itself to, or doesn't lend the listener to being typically patient enough to sit through a piece of classical music time and time and time again in order to become familiar with it. But this album is absolutely fantastic, and it's by the French composer Camille Saint Saens, and it's his third symphony, and it's the Organ Symphony. And I've just been talking about the indie rock and how that rush that you get, punk was the same, it was just like from non-stop. Bands might play it just for an hour, but it's just that great big rush. Well, imagine a piece of music that lasts for about 35 to 40 minutes and goes from quiet to loud to really quiet to explosive. And that's what this is. It's all about melody and dynamics. And I used to go to a lot of classical concerts, and my eldest daughter still plays in string orchestras. And I've grown used to listening to strings. And one of the things that you often hear if you're really listening is that not everybody is exactly playing the right note. There might be a string out of tune. There might be slightly early, slightly late. So, but you go along with that. But the orchestra, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, last week, this music emerges from silence into one long sustained string note, violin note. These guys and gals were absolutely on point. And as I've said before, this has great crashing organ chords, and the final movement blows your head off. It's absolutely fantastic. I've seen it performed many times. Last week was the best, without question. Unbelievable. So if you like your prog, you like loud organ, you like dynamics, you like changes of pace, man, that's your gateway to classical music. Anyway, changing things again completely. Number 19, and this is indie kind of pop from the 1980s, and it is Prefab Sprout and Swoon. This is often overlooked by the critics because Prefab Sprout's second album, Steve McQueen, or Two Wheels Good in North America, for copyright reasons, I understand, which has When Love Breaks Down on it, is considered to be the classic Prefab Sprout album. But actually, Prefab were brilliant throughout their career. Absolutely brilliant. And this debut, although it's raw, it's kind of wordy. It seems seemingly all about like unrequited love, or the early stages of love affairs for very young people, where everything's exciting and new. This is a great, great album. Its sound is a little bit on the thin side. It's kind of not good at the bottom end. There's not that much in terms of bass or drums, although there's some very interesting rhythms. You've got mostly kind of acoustic guitar and harmony vocals from Wendy Smith backing up Paddy McAloon, who's the songwriter. But this is an amazing album, and if you're interested in Prefab Sprout, definitely go back to this one. It might be worthy of a 21st century remix, but that's probably, when you consider how many songs or tracks that Paddy McAloon has supposedly got in the archive, he'll never get around to remixing this. But it's an absolutely fabulous album, Swoon. Songs written out of necessity. Fantastic. And the last one today is it's an avant-garde album. It's unclassifiable, even though I've kind of tried to classify it just there. It is a strange album. It came as a result of a big art project. There was a single release from it that was the most unlikely hit. And you kind of think, well, if that wasn't a hit, would this artist would she have disappeared without trace? Of course, we'll never know, because she went on to have a pretty decent career. But this is Laurie Anderson and Big Science. And I think the art project was called United States. And these tracks were from that art project and recorded in the studio. Or Superman was the big hit, of course. And she did she actually recorded United States live. There's a 5-album box set that's in the shelves here, where she does kind of live versions of this. But this is really interesting. You've got really quite jarring instrumentation here. Sometimes a little bit jarring percussion. You can tell it's an art project. There's not much in the way of songs. She doesn't sing very much on this album. It's often spoken word. But the great thing is that her diction is exceptionally good and her voice is soft. So it's very comforting, even though she's not really singing to you. You get that lovely kind of someone kind of wise speaking to you over this music. The title track, Big Science, is really quite beautiful, and she does sing a little bit on that one, but everything else is definitely worth hearing. Wonderful Laurie Anderson. Of course, she ended up with Lou Reed. But yeah, that's a brilliant album. So that's the next 5 in Dave's Fave 500. Hope you found some of those interesting. I'll provide a link to the classical music rundown for anybody who's curious about that. I did that video some time ago, but I'll dig it out and stick it in the description. And I'll link to the previous one in this series at the end of this video as well. So if you got this far, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next installment. Bye for now.